have a change in presenters tonight. Matt Hayes' wife had emergency surgery this morning, so he had to cancel out the last minute. So when Bill called me as I was going to work this morning, I called Richard Griggs in a panic to see if he'd come bail us out. I was going through the list, and last thing we wanted to do was cancel the meeting. What I'm going to do every meeting is put some of the announcements up on the board, for that month, just in case anybody wants to take a picture, and you don't have to scribble it down. You can take a picture with your camera. The next thing we got coming up is on Saturday the 17th, the Tie-a-thon, the Time for a Cause of Madison Schools. That's Saturday from 9 to 3. You need to bring your own device and tools. All the materials will be provided at their own. It's going to be barbecue. We're going to have some barbecue for lunch. Tying in line with AKA Taco Tuesday, the 24th, 6:30 to 8 at Boyce Brewery. That's on Country Club, Winston-Salem. Bill Mitchell helped that get going, and we've been there every Tuesday like that, except for when the weather.
Quick question.
Yes.
I looked at the calendar today, and I didn't see any tying things on there for the rest of the year.
For what? The Royce? Did you go to the brewery site?
I can't go that far.
But yeah, that's when it is. He reserves a table.
So we're not doing that here anymore?
No.
We stopped line and tying north and south because
We weren't getting
Chuck and myself here at this location got tired of sitting here waiting for people to come out. Nobody ever show up. And John Robbins, the last 3 he taught down at the Bellas, the same thing. So we finally made a command decision. I get people to come up to Lenore, and that's more than enough. We can teach you, you can tie.
It's okay.
We wanted to get something growing up north, and try to expand the closest foot. That's on Tuesday, 4th. Then we got the Fly Time meetup at Carolina Mountain Sports. That's going to be Thursday, the 26th at 6:30. That's a real good time. Just ask if you're going to go. RSVP, seats are limited, so they really do need to get a head count. You can go next door, get something to drink, beer or wine, and bring it over to Richard's store. Sit there and tie. Yes.
What was the date?
21st.
They said February
17th.
February 21st. 17th.
Right. 21st, I'm sorry. And then this is my contact information. If anybody has any questions, whatever, that's my new email. I don't put anything on it with fly fishing stuff, so I don't get messages a day, all kinds of advertisements and stuff. So I try to check it at least once a day. And with that being done, Richard, our presenter tonight is Richard Griggs, Carolina Mountain Sports, a long-time member and supporter of the club.
Thank you, DJ. DJ called me this morning and said, "Hey, how about doing a program tonight?" I said, "Piece of cake, no problem, Everything's on my old computer that's about to catch fire in the metal trash can. So, but anyway, I thought about it for a few minutes and put together some stuff that may be of interest to some of you. It may be new, some of it may be old. Nick asked me earlier today, talking to you, buddy. He said, "What are you going to do tonight?" I said, "Well, it's sort of something like a beer flight." And he said, "I'll be there." I said, "But it's no beer. It's kind of a variety pack, a sample pack of things that come up periodically in the store, people have questions about. So that's what we're going to share with you tonight. And the first item, and if you've got questions or comments, feel free to interject. That's no problem at all. I got an email the other day from Farbank. Sorry about that. I got an email the other day from Farbank, which is the company that's Sage, Redington, and Rio. And there's new stuff coming out, which is a little bit interesting that it's coming out now. Usually new fly fishing stuff comes out in the fall. But the product that caught my eye is a new tippet material. So people are familiar with tippet. You use either nylon or monofilament tippet or fluorocarbon tippet to add to your leader to make it longer or to restore that leader back to its original length. Well, now Rio has a new tippet called ESP. And we don't know what it's made out of. It looks very similar to monofilament and fluorocarbon. You can pass that around. It's about the same diameter. In fact, it is the same diameter as most stuff. But ESP, I guess the ES stands for extremely sensitive. It's like some of the fly fishermen I know, extremely sensitive. The lowest stretch out there, so that you're going to be able to feel a take, a strike, a pickup much better than you might with something like monofilament or fluorocarbon, so they claim. The neat thing is it's only $10. So nylon monofilament tippet material usually runs about $6. The fluorocarbon, depending upon which brand you get, runs anywhere from about $15 up to $23. So this is not so bad coming in at only $10 for a spool, particularly if it allows you to catch more fish, and I'm sure it will. Bill says, now we need to teach knots. Well, thank you, because that's a good segue into my next topic, which is tippet rings. How many people here use tippet rings? Does everybody know what a tippet ring is? And it's not something that you key on your iPhone, okay? Quite a few years ago, I was at the fly fishing show in Raleigh. Mickey and I had a booth there. And one of the customers came up to me that was from the Statesville area, and she said, I just left a presentation with Lefty Cray, and it was good. And she said, but I told him that I had trouble with knots, that just tying these different knots that you needed was just a challenge. And he said, get some tippet rings. So she comes over to my booth at the show, and she says, Richard, have you got some tippet rings? And I said, no, I don't, but I'll order some for you. Come see me in about a week in Statesville. And she said, okay. And then I turned to Mickey and I said, Mickey, what the hell's a tippet ring? And we didn't have a clue. He said, I don't know what it is either. Well, since then, tippet rings have gotten to be quite popular. If you're not using tippet rings, I certainly would encourage you to give them a shot. There's two different packs passing around. The first thing that people say when they see the pack of tippet rings is they say, oh, that's a snap swivel, because it's about a half an inch, 3/4 of an inch long. And I say, no. The tippet rings are the little teeny rings on the end of the snap. And they take a closer look and say, what? And I say, oh, I see the little rings on there. Well, the neat thing about the tippet ring, and there's a diagram on the packet that's coming around, you can take your leader, tie it to one side of the ring with a clinch knot. Some people call that a fisherman's knot or cinch knot. It's that common knot that everybody seems to know. And then you can pull off a section of tippet material and tie it to the other side of the tippet ring using that same knot, which is probably the same knot that people use to tie their fly onto their tippet. So you only have to know that one knot. So if you use tippet rings, you save yourself some headache. Now, the important thing to remember, and as the packet comes around, you'll see it, don't take the little ring off the snap before you tie it to your leader. Okay, you'll see why in a minute. When you tie it to your leader, take that leader, find the ring that's closest to the opening of the snap. Tie it on, tighten it up, Then you can take the ring off and tie the tippet to the other side of the ring. Works great. It really doesn't interfere with fishing. I mean, you've got your competition fishermen using these tippet rings. It makes it easy to adjust your leader. If you're fishing tandem flies, 2-fly rig, 3-fly rig, it makes it easy to attach a tag for a second or third fly off your rig there. They tell me that if you're particularly frugal and you want to save money, that you can buy these things at Hobby Lobby. Now, I'm not encouraging to spend money at Hobby Lobby, but Bill mentioned in that green chapter, I was over there a couple of years ago, and I was mentioning tippet rings, and Anthony Hips, who's a pretty avid fly tyer, he said, oh, you can get those at Hobby Lobby a lot cheaper than you sell them in the fly shop. I said, well, thanks a lot, Anthony. I appreciate that. So sort of along the same line of tippet rings is something called a micro swivel. And these are pretty dog. If you look at that swivel that's going around, that's about a 1/2 inch long at least. These micro swivels are much, much smaller, and they're only about a 1/4 inch long and extremely lightweight. The advantage of the micro swivel is it reduces line twist. Now, one of my favorite pastimes is to float the New River and fish for smallmouth bass in the summertime during warm weather, and I'm constantly picking up, making casts, making false casts, and you'll find out that with a lot of your popping bugs, a lot of your topwater bugs, when you're casting, that fly spins in the air because it's not aerodynamically perfect or whatever. And the first thing you know, you've got this massive twist in your leader, and as soon as that leader comes next to each other, it wraps around itself. Well, the only good side to that is it's a chance to work on your colorful language when that happens. I started using these micro swivels years ago, and it totally changed everything. It makes life so much easier if you're doing a lot of false casting, particularly with bigger flies. Some guys are using them on their nymph rigs. If they're doing tandem flies, they're using that little micro swivel to reduce any twist that they might get from the flies swinging or pivoting in the current. So micro swivels, it's come around, you'll see they're much smaller, but they're also easier to tie on than tippet rings because you've got something that's a little bit longer to grip and hold on to. One of the questions that often comes up from customers is, what fly line should I get? I've got a 5-weight rod or a 4-weight line, and what fly line should I buy? And usually that leads to a discussion about fly lines and line weights and how rods are rated. And a lot of times people are surprised to realize how fly lines are rated, how they're designated. So I've got a 5-weight fly line here, and fly lines are rated by an industry standard. The companies actually weigh the first 30 feet of the fly line. And if it falls in this certain category, then it's designated as a 5-weight. If it falls into the category that's a little bit lighter, it's a 4-weight. If it falls into the category that's heavier, it's a 6-weight. And of course, everybody assumes that, well, if I've got a 5-weight rod, I want to put a 5-weight line on there. And many times the answer is no, maybe you don't. It's very likely that you want to go up a line weight. If the industry standard is based on how much the first 30 feet of the fly line weighs, and if rod manufacturers rate their rods based on their ability to effectively, efficiently cast 30 feet of line back and forth, and you're not using 30 feet of line, then maybe your rod is not being used up to its potential. And if you're only casting 15 feet of line, then you may be casting half the weight that rod was rated for. So it's not being loaded like it might want to be, like you might want it to be, to help with casting efficiency, particularly if you're throwing shorter casts. So if a rod is rated based on its ability to throw a 30-foot cast, and you're only fishing 5 feet of line or 10 feet of line out your rod tip, that's not much weight for that rod to cast. So a lot of folks find out that they upline at least one line weight, sometimes 2 line weights. When they're throwing short distance, short cast on small streams, they're getting a lot more benefit out of that fly rod, and it's performing for them, and they're not having to work as hard. So nothing wrong with uplining. The reverse sometimes can be true, but usually that's not the case. One of the things to look at when you buy a fly line, number one, I think the important thing is to look at the diagram on the box so that you know how long the front taper is, and that you know how long the body of the fly line is before you get to the rear taper. It's surprising how many people would come in to take a fly casting class, and I illustrate the tapers to them out in the field. And they had no idea that fly lines were tapered with a front taper and a rear taper, much less the distance between the 2 tapers. So always a good idea, I think, to study the back of the box, to know what your fly line is, what the dimensions are, and also what the length of the front taper is. If you're fishing for bass, throwing big bass bugs, usually you want a shorter front taper. Some bass bug lines are 2 feet or 3 feet, their front taper. And a trout line usually may have a taper of 7 feet, maybe 9 or 10 feet if it's designed for a delicate delivery. So I think it's always worth to examine those boxes. A lot of people come in, they buy a new fly line, and I say, you want the box? No, throw that away. And they really don't have a clue what they've walked out of the store with as far as the length of the head, the length of the front taper, how far back is the rear taper, things like that that can be important when you're starting to work on your casting, and particularly distance casting. This is an easy group, no questions yet. A number of years ago, I was at the Shallow Water Show in Charleston, South Carolina. Big fly fishing show. Well, not just fly fishing, but it was a lot of fly fishing. And it was always an excellent show if you were interested in saltwater fishing. And I was watching a casting demonstration. Some guy that I didn't know, and I happened to be standing there, and he was getting ready to do his presentation, and there was a guy standing next to me, and he looked an awful lot like this fellow Lefty Cray. And it was Lefty. So we started talking, and he said, hey, this guy getting ready to do the demonstration. I said, yeah. He said, he came to Maryland, drove from South Carolina to Maryland to spend a day with me so I could teach him how to cast. And he said, now here he is at this big shallow water show doing a casting demonstration. But the guy could cast pretty good, but he had a casting tip to help with your tracking when you're casting. And tracking, there may be a couple of different definitions, but usually tracking means taking that rod back and forth in the same plane in a straight line so that your fly line is going back and forth in a straight line so that you're getting a very accurate cast. Now what happens a lot, and you'll see this on some videos, and I see it a lot, somebody will take that fly rod and they'll bring it for their back cast, and that rod comes way around like this. I had a young casting student. He and his brother and his dad were taking some casting classes. And no matter what I tried to do, he'd bring that rod back, and then he had to bring it like this. And then he'd take it forward. So that's an exaggerated problem. Certainly no tracking back and forth in a straight line. And I couldn't get him to correct that. But you'll find that a lot of people, and I think I'm guilty of it too, sometimes you bring that rod back, and without even thinking about it, that reel turns out, and when that reel turns out, that rod tip goes in and creates a loop or an arc behind you. Then when you're coming forward, you're having to correct for that to get that straight delivery. So tracking is important, particularly if you're striving for accuracy and maybe for distance. That helps a little bit for distance. But anyway, we're standing next to Lefty, the guru of casting, and we're watching this guy do the demonstration, and the guy says, here's a tip to help you with your tracking. And he pulls out a paint stick from his hip pocket. And it's like, I can't wait to see this. And he said, take this paint stick. Okay, this is not a paint stick. This is just a piece of cardboard, but I couldn't find a paint stick today, okay? So he said, take this paint stick in the morning, stand in front of the mirror in the bathroom, and cast. Practice your casting. And look at that stick in the mirror. Hopefully you still got your towel around you. Look at that stick in the mirror. And the moment you see the flat side, you know that you've turned that reel out and that rod tip's swinging around behind you. He said, practice that so you're just looking at the edge and you don't see the flat side by turning that wrist out. And I found that to be a very helpful tip because so many people, when they bring that hand back, it's just automatic. They have to turn it out like that, and then that makes it more difficult to achieve that nice straight tracking line. Now, I think a paint stick works pretty good because it's a surface that you can look at. You could maybe do it with your hand, and if you see the flat, but that's not quite the same as when you're holding on to a fly rod handle. How many people here have used a popping cork in salt water? Okay, a few maybe. Popping cork, if you're not familiar with it, it's usually a big cone-shaped device with a piece of wire running through it, a loop on each end of the wire, maybe a couple of beads, and when you jerk it on the surface of the water, it makes a big gurgle, splash, commotion, which sounds like a fish feeding on other fish, chasing minnows. And in theory, and I don't think it's more than a theory, when other fish hear this crashing, this splashing, this gurgling, they say, oh, one of my buddies is feeding on minnows somewhere. I need to go over there and check it out. Well, several years ago, a guy down in the eastern part of the state named Gary Dubiel, he runs Spec Fever Guide Service. He decided he needed a popping cork for a fly rod. For that same reason, something that would create that popping, gurgling, splashing noise to imitate a predator fish feeding on minnows or bait. Some people have achieved that with a big popping bug. But Gary came up with this foam cylinder that you buy as fly tying materials. It's just a foam cylinder. He ran a little metal rod through it and put a loop or a circle hoop on each end of the metal rod. And then you tie your leader to one end of that popping cork, and you come and put some leader on it, and you tie a fly on the other end of the leader. And so this floats on the surface, and when you jerk that rod, it creates an amazing disturbance on the water, even though it doesn't have a cupped face. It's not very big. He makes them in a couple of different sizes. But it creates a great disturbance on the water, and when you pop it, your fly swings up to the surface. And then when you stop, it starts to drift down. And then you jerk it again, and that fly comes up to the surface. That noise attracts fish. They come over and apparently see this fly falling, thinking it's an injured bait fish. Easy prey. They jump on it. Boom. This is very effective. Now, I've had good luck with this on redfish. It's supposed to be good on smallmouth bass, other warm water fish, pike, that sort of thing. certainly other saltwater fish like speckled trout, false albacore, and that sort of thing. But it does take a little bit of a rod to cast it. Probably at least an 8 weight. Maybe if a guy had a 7 weight, he could cast it, if he was good at casting. But but pretty effective, and there's a good chance that this will get tried on smallmouth this summer. Yes, sir.
You know those foam ear protectors? I made one with a long shank hook,
Yeah.
and it worked pretty good.
Very good. Yeah. So one of the important elements here that I think is important, you've got your popping cork, you've got about 3 feet of, pass that around, would you please? You've got about 3 feet of leader behind it. It's called a pop-in fly. And you pop it, that fly comes up to the surface, and then it starts to drift down. One of the things that enhances the action of the fly is if you will tie a non-slip loop knot. Rather than come up tight with a clinch knot where that fly is limited based on how flexible that leader is, put a non-slip loop knot in there, and that fly is going to have a lot more action. You can also use that on nymph rigs in freshwater, and some folks have even used that non-slip loop knot on dry flies. Now be very careful, there's a sharp hook in here. Oh, yeah, jeez. So there's another knot that you might have to learn is a non-slip loop knot. That's an easy one to Google. That was a real popular knot that Lefty Cray used to show, but you can Google that and get the directions on how to tie it, and it's actually pretty easy. Strike indicators. As far as I know, this is the most recent version of some sort of strike indicator. These are the Oros. And if you're not familiar with these will come around. It's a sphere, and you unscrew the halves of the sphere, put your leader between there, and then screw the halves back together. Pretty nice rig, and it's been pretty popular. This happens to be a variety pack with 4 different sizes on it. Now, how many people use strike indicators? Yeah, a few more hands. So, say that again.
Bobbers also.
Bobbers, yes. Excuse me.
Steve Patterson uses Nightcrawler.
Yeah. This group was much more sophisticated, so I thought they'd all be using strike indicators rather than bobbers. One of the things to know about strike indicators or bobbers is that sometimes they can be very effective and increase your catch rate. And then other times they can be very effective at scaring the fish. And it's like, do I use them? Do I not use them? Well, dirty water conditions where the visibility is poor, rough water conditions, you can get by with something big like this that the fish probably can't see. If the water's low and clear or just clear, they're probably going to see this after they've been fished for a few days. And I remember vividly on Helton Creek before Helene, there was a spot there where you could usually always find a pod of fish. And if you stood a little bit downstream or off to the side of the pod of fish and you flipped a nymph with an indicator up there and watched it, you'd see that pod of fish separate to let that indicator pass overhead, which meant they weren't interested in the fly that was suspended under the indicator. That indicator would pass on through, those fish would come back together. And it's like, so I convinced myself that they really were scared of the indicator. I took the indicator off, circled around, went upstream of the pod of fish, just drifted just the fly into them, and they immediately started hitting it. So a lot of the times the indicator will work well for you, and a lot of the times it won't. But This is a variety pack that part of the proceeds go to casting for recovery. And you see 4 different sizes. Well, there's the smallest one, which is pretty doggone effective and is pretty subtle in its presentation. And the white ones blend very well in with the foam bubbles and a foam line on the stream, which is usually where you want to drift your fly.
What's your feeling on the wool?
I'm not sure I know which ones you're talking about. Oh, you said wool. Well, I think that's a great indicator. I remember maybe the first time I saw a wool indicator, I thought the guy had tied a bird to his leader. It was so big. So I think the wool is great. We used to make strike indicators out of poly yarn, fly tying material, and sort of hitch them into the leader. The only problem I have with that is it's a little bit harder to adjust if you want to adjust for the depth. These are easy to adjust, but therein lies the main fault of an indicator. If you're not really paying attention to the water depth, your flies may not be getting nearly as deep as they need to be because you haven't realized you need to readjust that depth to allow for those flies to sink deeper. One of the best tips I heard was here at a meeting, and the speaker, who apparently was a competition fly fisherman, said, best tip I can tell you is nothing but tip it below the surface. Nothing but tip it below the surface. And some people's kind of asking him to clarify that, and he said if the water's 4 feet deep, you want at least 4 feet of tippet. Forget this rule about 1.5 to 2 times the depth of the water. Put longer tippet on there so that everything's going to sink as quick as it can, because on a tapered leader, once you get past the 2 feet of tippet portion, the leader starts getting thicker and thicker, and it slows the sink rate of your fly. And so nothing but tippet below the surface has been a good tip for me. It's meant sometimes that I'm using an unusually long tippet, much longer than I might think I would use otherwise. But that's a good thing to remember, and use the strike indicators that you can readjust the depth on easily. Some of the yarn ones, like the New Zealand, are pretty easy to readjust. Yeah, so I think the wool's good. Certainly very subtle and delicate. And the last thing I've got for this evening. What? Oh, that's what I forgot. I left that at the store. Doggone it, I meant to bring that. How many people have seen the new stocking report for this spring? So it's been out for a while. What? Fish? Stockfish? The North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission published this on Facebook, a week or so ago, an article talking about the Bobby Setzer hatchery in Brevard being closed for the first time in 40 years. All the fish have been moved to the Armstrong hatchery, except for the ones that they're going to buy from someplace else. And they also bought a private hatchery in Brevard. So they're buying fish from another location. They bought a private hatchery. They've got fish at Armstrong. But even so, one of the things that they point out is an altered stocking frequency. And one of the things that I read today is all the hatchery supported streams usually got stocked in March. That's not the case this year. They're not all going to get stocked in March before opening day on that first Saturday in April. And the delayed harvest streams, they posted the schedule for that. And it is on the state website, ncwildlife.org. But when you look at this, what you'll see is that a lot of our traditional delayed harvest streams are going to be stocked the first week of March, not much in April at all. And then they're going to be stocked again that first week of May. with some scattered in between, but it looks like March and May are the months where we're going to see a lot of stocking right at the beginning of the month, and then some other stuff trickling in as you go through some other weeks. Well, good. That's all I've got for tonight. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay, we got a question.
Usually during the month of March, the general waters are closed.
Right. Hatchery supported waters.
Any of them going to be open or not stopped?
I don't know that. My guess would be no, that they're still the same regulations, but yeah, if they're not stocking them. That's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that, but my guess would be the regs aren't going to change. So, and they're going to be, one of the other things that it emphasized, they're going to be posting daily stocking reports on the state website, but also the changes will be announced through press releases, Twitter, Facebook, and on ncwildlife.gov, which tells me that we can anticipate some changes from that schedule as it was originally posted.
They say last year when the biologists spoke after the hurricane hit that they were going to put dates out, but they also weren't going to have basically not all the time stock on that date. They were going to move it around that way they could get it.
Well, and when you look at this, when it says the first week of March, you don't know which day the stream's going to be stocked. They give you March 2 through 6. So somewhere in that 4-day period, your favorite stream will get fish. You just don't know which day it is. But I think if you check the daily stocking report, you'll find out after it was stocked. Yeah. Good. Feel free to look at that stuff. If you've got questions, I'll be around. Thank you very much.